Good afternoon once again. We are discussing going through this time of isolation. I'm going back a little bit, talk about the Friends, Food, and Faith sessions we have here at St. Gabriel the Archangel on the first Tuesdays of every month. So, just to put a quick plug, we do this live. Usually, we would meet together and have like a potluck type style. We're kind of advocating that. We're going to keep doing this at least on Zoom or on. And on YouTube until the quarantine, until this time of isolation is over. We can get together again. I put a link up on our YouTube page to the Zoom address that you can actually click on. It should set up for you automatically, and then you can actually engage in the conversation. We're going to talk about the next session, which is going to be on May 5th at 7:15. And just so I'm aware of what the actual topic is. Let's see. I just sent that out a couple days ago. Okay. It will be, why does the church teach that the Eucharist is the real presence of Jesus, not just a symbol? So this may be a point of departure for some of our brothers and sisters in other faiths. It's important to kind of keep that context in mind. It's really kind of the viewpoint of Catholics and our Orthodox brothers and sisters that the Eucharist actually is the real presence of Jesus Christ. And we've been finding through our dialogues that other denominations believe that too, but a different understanding of what that actually means. That Jesus truly becomes present, but how that happens, what actually occurs, is a little bit different. Fundamentally, though, we're kind of finding we're talking about the same, at least have some of the same understanding of what actually is going on. So today, though, we're going to kind of go back to February and talk about what kind of led up to the implementation of Vatican II, what actually led up to the council itself, and kind of what came out of it. So this is going to be more of like a what. Typically, we find, I found in my experience, that many Catholics and really everyone in general doesn't really know what came out of Vatican II, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But really going to talk about what and what kind of led up to these dialogues, these implementations, these products of Vatican II. So a little bit of history. I have to go back kind of Pius X. So Pius X was the Pope around the turn of the 20th century. And he was kind of a reforming Pope. He reformed the Liturgy of the Hours. But he kind of developed the spirit of development of the liturgy that kind of took root and we kind of see today in our time in what we call the Novus Ordo, or the new way of celebrating the Mass. But that kind of started with Pius X. He reformed the prayers that every priest says on a daily basis, the Liturgy of the Hours, which includes, you'll see it on the YouTube channel, morning prayer, daytime prayer, evening prayer, night prayer, and then office of readings, which can take place anytime throughout the day. A priest, deacon, bishop is obligated by their vows to pray these hours every day. Sometimes in orders, you'll see them pray multiple of these hours. So like daytime prayer, and our Shastan priests were required to say daytime prayer. So daytime prayer includes terst, sect, and non. And those really just correspond to the hour of the day. So terst would be the third hour of the day, sect would be the sixth, non would be the ninth. And that corresponds to the old Jewish calendar, so the Jewish time of day, that they took basically the day from sun up to sundown. So really, terst would basically be like 9 o'clock, sect would be like noon, and then non would be actually 3, because it's those 3 hour segments throughout the course of the day. But now some orders will actually pray all 3 of those daytime prayers. Now, our Shastan priests are only required to pray 1. Some orders may do a vigil in the middle of the night instead of like office of readings. A lot of it depends on the different orders and their rule, but our Shastan priests at least are required to pray those 5 hours every day. So to make it a little more amicable to the pastors of the world, because pastors have other responsibilities other than just praying the hours all day and saying Mass, they kind of abbreviated and kind of changed it to it's more palatable to incorporate into a pastor's day. Now, it's always kind of going back, it's always just basically praying the Psalms along with one of the gospel readings, except for daytime prayers, most just Psalms and reading. And that kind of harkens back to our Jewish roots, that a practicing Jewish person at the time of Jesus, before that, would have prayed these hours at the same times, right, throughout the day. We see that some with our Muslim brothers and sisters. They have certain times they pray. So they kind of got that from us, and we got it from Jewish people. And so we kind of find that root in our prayer life from our Jewish brothers and sisters. But Pius X kind of reformed that. And then, going into the 20th century, we had some problems, primarily World War I and World War II, which kind of put a damper on a lot of these. Now, really, Vatican II is supposed to be a continuation of Vatican I, which happened around the 1850s. And one of the big developments of Vatican I that was finally agreed upon after the council convened was this idea of papal infallibility. So at that time, it was kind of put out as a idea that the Holy Father can make infallible statements, and we have that practice today. Now, there's certain criteria that need to be followed to actually be considered infallible by the Pope. So, for instance, the Pope couldn't just come out and say tomorrow that, Coke, that's the best drink, best soft drink. Every good Catholic should just stop drinking Pepsi and start drinking Coke. That is not an infallible statement, because in order to be infallible, it needs to be a matter of faith and morals, which I would think drinking Pepsi or Coke wouldn't necessarily be an issue of faith and morals. It had to be based on his authority as the Holy Father in communion with with the magisterium of the Church, and corresponds to the teachings of the Church. So in union with apostolic tradition. So, for instance, that's why the Pope couldn't come out tomorrow and say that Jesus Christ was not divine, right? That does not correspond to the tradition of the Church. It is not from as his authority as the Pope, nor is it true. So once that would happen, he would cease to be the Pope. So it's important to keep that in mind, because you see in certain documents since then this wording that corresponds with this infallible or not. So, like for instance, he would use on the issue, this issue of faith and morals. I, as successor of St. Peter, in union with my brother bishops, definitively state this. Now, it's thought that since 1854, which was when the first 1858. It was 1854 when the first infallible statement came out, which was about Mary, the Immaculate Conception. That was something that was already believed by Catholics through generations, and our Orthodox brothers and sisters, even since like the 3rd century, that Mary was actually born without sin. And so it was kind of a safe bet to actually make that definitive statement. Since then, we've had the Assumption, which was made in 1950 by John the 23rd. Pius the 12th. And so we've had some infallible statements made recently, John Paul II, when it comes to Dignitatis Morierum, about the dignity of women. Other statements, even Paul VI, when it came to Humanae Vitae, there's some infallible statements made, and it was actually championed again by John Paul II in his Theology of the Body. So there's really two main ones that kind of affect the dogma of the Catholic teaching, but there have been several made that actually correspond to Catholic teaching and are considered infallible, that weren't necessarily considered at the time to be infallible, but other understanding and development comes to understand that it actually truly was. So that was Vatican I. And so there were a lot of bishops that agreed with that understanding. One that did not agree with the history of St. Louis was our Archbishop Kenrick, who was kind of a holdout. It wasn't until after the council that he finally gave his consent, and he reasoned that it's because the council gave their consent is the fact that makes the Pope give them the authority to make these infallible statements. Yeah, kind of a fuzzy logic, but still, that's what he consented to, and that's what is still the teaching of the Church today. So, But it got interrupted, Vatican I, because of this guy named Napoleon, who was kind of rampaging through Europe and gobbling up a lot of stuff. So it kind of convened early. So flash forward about 100 years later, we had these world wars, which couldn't bring the council together. And so there was also the development of what the role of the church was in this society that has kind of come out of the Enlightenment, out of these world wars, and this kind of not necessarily feudal organization of society, but these kind of bonds between these nations based on marriage or whatever else. And so it was kind of convened pastorally, to give some direction of what the church's role was in this changing society, and especially in a society that kind of looked at authoritarian structures as not really valid anymore, especially in the United States where we have a democracy. So how does that kind of work? Where does the church fit in there too? So John the 23rd, he brought the council together in 1962. And unfortunately, halfway through the council, John the 23rd passed away. Before the council started, though, there was a big question that was brought about, which was the issue of sexual ethics in Christianity. So 1930, between this time of the two councils, all of Christianity was kind of on the same page when it came to sexual ethics. What is illicit, what is not illicit. Until the Council of Lambeth in 1930, where the Anglican Church got together and they said, you know what, we've had this development in science. We're kind of, the question really underlying all this was, are we masters of our own bodies as human beings? That's kind of the philosophical question. And the answer to that is yes, but we have to understand the gift of the body that comes from God, that we are stewards of these bodies, and so there's some dominion involved with that, but we're not the masters of them. We're not the supreme beings over them. They're gifts from God. It's kind of the Catholic understanding. It was the Christian understanding up until time. So the Anglicans said, well, we have this development called the pill, which can help regulate fertility for women. And maybe kind of, there's also this mindset that maybe we're starting to overpopulate the world, and maybe kind of getting too deep in the resources we have as society, and we'll use them up too quickly to where we won't actually have a world to live in. Over time, that theory is kind of proven to be somewhat false. It's today, and there's no indication it will be any more true in the future. Well, there's some, but still, that's to be debated. And so what came from that was the Anglican Church and their Lambeth Council decided, well, for those that are already in marriage, we could see how it could be illicit to use these other means of controlling one's family, other than abstaining from the marital act. So a committee was put together by John the 23rd to actually look at this question of not just priests and bishops, but of scientists, lay people, doctors. And that kind of fueled into Vatican II as well. So the council was convened in 1965. And one thing to keep in mind with Vatican II was this was the first time ever in the history of the church where there was a constant presence of recording, media presence, at every session of the council. This is before the days of Instagram and Facebook and everything else, but still, it was the first time there were cameras involved in these sessions of the council. And so what was happening was, as in any council that happened before that, bishops get together, they discuss a certain topic, they debate it back and forth. They try and project things. What about this? What about this? And they come to a conclusion that is then, at the end of the council, given to the Holy Father, who then either says, yeah, I agree with all this, or, this doesn't make any sense, I'm going to change this, and then promulgates that, meaning puts it out to society, sends it out for people to read, to know, to learn about. So in the first time in the history of the church, you have these cameras that are present in these sessions that are actually recording what's being debated. So the things being debated will be like priestly celibacy. That is something that really has started every council since really almost Constantinople back in 451. That even we'll talk about that next time when it talks about we'll talk about priestly celibacy for the March session coming up. But that was discussed. Even the issues of those who experience same-sex attraction, homosexual tendencies. Is there room for that in the church, or even within society, to actually express one's love in a physical way for two people of the same sex? How does that look like in the priesthood? Or is it illicit to have someone who has those tendencies to become a priest? Can we look at maybe having women being ordained? So a lot of these questions were brought about at the council, and they were answered. But what we have are kind of two different councils going on because of this presence. That all the facts weren't necessarily debated and hashed out on camera, but a lot of things that were promoted and looked upon were put on camera. So what you're getting is every night you're hearing what's happening at the council, and they're talking, oh, the bishop is talking about ordaining women or priests being married, or so it fueled kind of this what we call the spirit of Vatican II, where there's this mindset, oh, this may happen. Okay, we're going to change all this different stuff. It's going to be, oh, we're going to use the vernacular anymore in the mass, or oh, the whole meat on Fridays thing, we're going to actually be able to have that now. And then what actually happened was what came out of Vatican II, the true fruit of Vatican II. And that kind of includes 4 major documents: Dei Verbum, Lumen Gentium, Sacrosanctum Concilium, and Gaudium et Spes. And then some of the lesser ones were Gravissimum Educatione, which was like about education, Nostra Aetate, which is like the Christian relationship with our Jewish and Muslim brothers and sisters, and other religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, some of the other natural religions, Dignitatis Humanae, dignity of the human person, and then Ad Gentes. But the 4 main ones were Dei Verbum, Lumen Gentium, Sacrosanctum Concilium, and Gaudium et Spes. And so those were the 4 main documents coming out of the council. So again, you have this what actually came out, which really didn't change much when it came to the life of the church. But then you have the spirit of the council, which kind of came out and said, okay, we're going to do all this different stuff. So for instance, there was nothing really ever said that came out that says you should pull the altar away from the tabernacle. I mean, before 1968, even maybe before that, maybe 1960, most churches were set up where the priest would celebrate what we called ad orientem, towards the east. And east wasn't necessarily, the compass east. It would be liturgical east, meaning towards the tabernacle, rising sun, Jesus, the Son of God, right? And so they would be facing the tabernacle when they celebrated Mass. For instance, here in St. Louis, have you ever been to Francis de Sales or the Oratory of Augustine and James, or even St. Barnabas out in St. Charles? Those sanctuaries are kind of set up more for the old form of the Mass, where it was called the Tridentine, right, or the extraordinary form of the Mass. So that was really kind of what was done up between the Council of Trent in 1500s all the way until 1960. That's how Mass was celebrated. And again, the council was kind of convened to kind of, okay, well, how can we engage the laity more in the liturgy? How can we look at these different ministries that are done by the priest or by us, clergy? Can we open those up to make it more acceptable, right? Participatory for the laity. And so before that, though, there was these kind of reforms that were being done without really any direction or indication. That kind of brought the altar out, turned the priest around, towards the people. And part of the reform was, okay, we're going to actually celebrate the Mass in the vernacular, in whatever language that you find yourself to be in. Now, the governing document for that was Sacrosanctum Concilium. And nowhere there does it say, pull out the altars, do all this different stuff that we weren't doing before. It does mention the use of vernacular, but the way it's worded, it indicates that vernacular should be used for catechetical reasons, meaning for teaching purposes, with the intention that once people understood what was happening, well, hey, let's go back to Latin, how it was before, right? That is the language of the church. That's what's always been championed and upheld in the liturgy. So we should, once people understand what's happening in Novus Ordo, we'll go back to Latin, right? Now we could make the argument, well, Latin's not really taught anymore, or well, chicken or the egg, I guess. I mean, there could have been that spirit of Vatican II saying we're not going to do this anymore, so let's stop teaching Latin. I don't know, 6 one hand, half a dozen the other. But for whatever reason, we never really went back to that intention of Sacrosanctum Concilium of celebrating the Mass in Latin. We kind of kept it in the vernacular where we were. The other thing that kind of came out of Vatican II was this idea of active participation, which opened up ministries more to the lay people, especially when it came to proclaiming the Word of God, the distribution of the Blessed Sacrament. And that was all regulated, but what it was based on was not so much this activism, which sometimes people get wrapped up in. That this was my ministry. Well, that's not really what the intent of the council really was. The idea was that these ministries should foster from an internal disposition towards liturgy, meaning it's kind of like a detachment. It's that, well, if I minister, I minister. If I don't, I don't. It's not really that big of a deal. As long as I'm here praying, receiving the grace that God's trying to give me, that's all that really counts. And there was a term that came out of that called active participation. And that's really what the council was developed around in order to spur on the liturgy. It was an internal disposition first that manifests itself in a ministry. Sometimes we get that flipped around, but that's not really the intention of the Vatican. Of course, it was never actually said that women were ordained or mentioned, or priests get married. But because of that spirit of Vatican II, you kind of saw this mentality starting to foster, especially in the time was the 60s. There was a lot of rebellion in the air. And there was a thought that the church was going to come along with this time and allow for these things to start happening. And unfortunately, you had some people entering seminaries, entering convents that they had this mentality that was going to happen, and it didn't. And so there's a level of frustration that kind of developed. Because of that, people were acting out in very unvirtuous ways, unfortunately, that caused a lot of scars. And that is a huge blemish on the church, and it's hard, it's difficult. And I would also say that anyone who's ever experienced abuse in any form should, tell somebody, right? Get it out there. But that's kind of what developed over this time. And also the seminaries weren't necessarily really on the same page. Not everyone was on the same page about how formation should work. It really, there wasn't really a solidifying approach until about 1997 with John Paul II. Trent said, there should be, seminaries developed and come about. But even then, it was really more looked on as a higher education institute and not necessarily a house of formation, which is really what they are today. So it's important to keep all that in mind, that, again, we have the spirit of Vatican II, and then it actually came out of Vatican II. Some of the things maybe that are kind of uncommon or common that thought that Vatican II changed. Well, the meat on Friday. Well, what the documents state is that, a Catholic can eat meat on Friday, provided they do some form of penance on that day. So again, it's not that you just, we got rid of that stuff for Lent, right? Lent, you're not supposed to have meat on Friday, but other Friday, good to go. Well, no. What really it said was, you can have meat provided you have some other penance on Friday. Not many Catholics understand that. I mean, I know growing up, I never heard that. I knew that my parents always told me, or my grandparents, we never had meat on Friday. It was never a thing. And then Vatican II, and it's all out the window. Well, it relaxed that requirement, but it said that you have to do something in its place. And that is not really well taught or catechized, unfortunately, but maybe that might be good to practice. I mean, it's all about that sacrifice. That's why we don't eat meat during Lent and Fridays, because we're kind of recognizing that Friday, the day the Lord went to the cross, the sacrifice he made, that we in some small way can make a sacrifice too. And that's what the intention of the documents really were, was to actually provide that sacrifice on Friday, commemorating that day as the day the Lord went to the cross and sacrificed himself for us. So yeah, those are kind of just a few examples. There's actually several. I'll give some links to the actual documents in the comments page, but there was a lot of discussion at night. I can't really go into it, but if anyone wants to add some comments or some questions in the comments section, please feel free. And again, I'll put those links up right after we're done here. So again, tomorrow we're going to talk about priestly celibacy. That's going to be the one we talked about in March. Again, this last month, April, we just talked about women ordination. Those are all linked to, there's a playlist down on the channel. And again, if you want to get involved on May 5th at 7:15 or 7 o'clock, 7:15, we will have a live stream and as well open up Zoom so people can actually conference in and ask questions and have a discussion face to face. That was the original intention of these things, were more kind of answer the whys and the whats. But Vatican II, there's a lot of whats that people don't really know, so we want to clarify that too. I want to mention. So when we talked about the council that John the 23rd got together before Vatican II, talk about birth control. So that council convened actually, or they dismissed after Vatican II was over, about 1967. And they gave a document to Paul VI, who was then the Pope, right? So John the 23rd died halfway through. Paul VI picked it up and actually was the one to end the council and promulgate the documents that came from that. They basically wrote up to the Holy Father, Paul VI, St. Paul VI, that, hey, look, birth control seems like a good idea. Maybe this is a time we can say that because of the intellect that we're given by God, we have this control now of our bodies that is really truly a gift. Well, Paul VI from that basically said, yeah, that doesn't sound right. And based on the understanding of the human person, kind of rejected a lot of the stuff that was given to them by these doctors and bishops and everything else. Primarily upholding what he kind of foresaw was that if even in a married couple were to start engaging with use of birth control, and it's not the fact that it's not natural. It's not the fact that it's what's the word I'm trying to look for? It's artificial. That's not the issue. What he was arguing was that if you find some way of blocking that self-gift to each other, that other things fall from that. Namely, you'll see more of a temptation to to cheat, right? You'll see an increase maybe of the products of the marital act wouldn't be appreciated. Meaning that, well, if, let's say you have a baby, because no birth control really is 100% foolproof. And what he really argued was, is there a way we can actually work with a woman's natural rhythm and a man's, man is always fertile, but a woman natural rhythm of their fertility, to say there are perfectly legitimate times that work within God's plan to say that, well, we shouldn't have it. And there's good reason to say we shouldn't have a child now. But is that necessarily a blocking of that self-gift? That is there a way to engage in the marital act between a couple that still is fruitful, unitive, but also decrease the chance of actually having a child, especially for legitimate reasons why there shouldn't be a child born, financial, sickness, whatever it may be. And from that developed Humanae Vitae, which he kind of outlined this stuff. So he called that there were going to be probably an increase in divorce rate, cheating, within marriage, increasing of pornography, abortion. Really, it was kind of prophetic in a way that we see kind of that happening in society today. So, what was developed from that was natural family planning, which again went back to the doctor, said, if we develop a process or a plan that kind of help with these couples who maybe for legitimate reasons don't want to have a child at this point in time. And the first few methods were not as good. The Billings method, for instance, the rhythm methods was really kind of it was really more of one size fits all, which is why it didn't really work. Because anyone who's studied biology or knows a little bit about biology or women's anatomy knows that not every woman has the same cycle. I know working with couples is a little awkward to hear from a priest about this kind of thing, but it was really based on really, really good science. Um, and as it developed over time, we now have the Marquette model, the Creighton model, which really are more tailored to the particular woman. And what's fascinating, people don't really know this, is or maybe don't look for it or aren't really told it, but the natural family planning method, especially the Creighton Marquette model, is actually more effective than a condom. Way more effective than a condom, and even birth control. And one of the problems that Paul VI really had with birth control is that it wasn't. There were really three ways that the pill kind of stops a pregnancy. It stops the fertilization, right, which could be seen as legitimate, maybe to some moralists. It can stop the or kill off one of either the sperm or the egg, which also okay. And then the last thing it would do is keep it from implanting in the womb. So there's basically two methods after fertilization, and then one stopping before. So it's kind of a three-pronged attack. The problem is you don't really know for sure which one takes effect. And so the after fertilization, that becomes more efficient. Your child there's a child there that is then killed. And that's one of the big reasons Paul VI said it was really not listed to use, even within the context of marriage. But we had this great development from that, and it's important to kind of realize the contribution that Paul VI made. That again was championed by John Paul II in his Theology of the Body. And if you haven't read Theology of the Body, look at that too in the contents. But yeah, so that's really what happened from Vatican II. We had some really, really good things, and we had some things that were misunderstood, unfortunately, and some not intended things happened from it as well. So that's about it. If you have any comments, please feel free, and we'll talk about priesthood celibacy in the next session tomorrow. We talk about in March. But again, May 5th, 7 o'clock, we're going to talk about the Eucharist. So I hope you guys can tune into that, and God bless you. I hope you guys are all doing well.